Welcome. In this interview, we have Chris Widener, who's also a Hall of Fame speaker and New York Times best-selling author. I have thoroughly enjoyed his audio programs from the past and videos he's had on the internet, and I was so pleased to be able to interview him and get his information on the topic of specifically how do you overcome obstacles to reach your most important goals. Chris's mentor was Jim Rohn, who's also the mentor to Tony Robbins. Also, Chris has worked with John Maxwell and Zig Ziglar, legends in the personal development industry. Let's go to this interview and you can see the wisdom that he has to share and how it can apply to all of us as we try to move forward and reach our goals.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Let's start off here with the first question. And this question, I think it's going to tell people a lot about you if they haven't already met you, okay? You explained how you went from losing your father at age 4, starting drugs in the 6th grade, 28 schools in 11 different homes, 47 referrals your sophomore year of high school, scalping Seahawks tickets and Final Four tickets, to becoming one of the top speakers and authors in the world who's had decades of success. Can you kind of explain the magic of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a circuitous route to get to where I am, considering how I started. Life did not start out well for me. But you know what? I think you find that in a lot of different people. People who overcome adversity, they become stronger, and because you have to. So I think when people are struck with adversity or real tough times, they either falter and fail, or they figure out how to get through it. And the people who figure out how to get through it, they've now developed something that they can use in any industry. Doesn't matter if they're selling cars or selling houses or writing books or, running a company or raising children. They figure out how to make things work. And so for me, it started with getting a mentor, probably midway through my high school, junior year, something like that. I started going to a little Lutheran youth group in North Bend, Washington. And there was a good old boy, was the youth minister there, good old boy from Montana. And two things he had that I needed. One was size 11 cowboy boots. I needed a male role figure that would say, you've got a lot of potential and you're really messing it up. And that's what he did. He came alongside. He was loving when he needed to be loving. He was harsh when he needed to be harsh. And that's exactly what I needed as a sort of a renegade young teenage guy. But the other thing is he taught me about God and a greater purpose. And he said, you were put here for a reason and you have a purpose. And that just completely changed my world. And to understand that there's something bigger than just these 70 years we get. And, there's something bigger than just what happens for us. It's what happens for us and through us and to us, and how that has a ripple effect into all the people's lives that we interact with. So I started speaking right out of college. I got into college and got a degree in youth and family work. I thought I was going to work with at-risk kids like myself, and spent 3 years as a youth director, but I was already starting to do speaking engagements because people wanted to know how this crazy kid ended up getting his life together. And then that eventually transitioned over to doing more adult speaking and those kinds of things. And so that's how I ended up here. I ended up with a couple of really great mentors. I ended up with John Maxwell in the early 2000s, worked with him, ghost wrote for him for a couple of years, and then spent 7 years with Jim Rohn, working with Jim Rohn, and of course, writing his last book, 12 Pillars, which you mentioned. And then I had a TV show. I had my own TV show, Made for Success, which you mentioned, but I also co-hosted Zig Ziglar's television show. That was called True Performance. I think you can still find it on YouTube, actually. So I had a lot of help along the way, and a lot of mentors, a lot of people who pushed open doors for me and gave me a lot of opportunities. And so I've been really blessed with a lot of great mentors who led me along. I had the ambition, and I had a lot of great people helping all along.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that story, because I think what it shows is that you didn't come from, the top of the ladder or anything. You worked your way up, and I love that, because it just shows that, it's possible. And I think that's so important for people to realize that it is possible and you can do it.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right. The next question is, you've helped transform a lot of people's lives, and I'm sure you've noticed some patterns here. What is something that gets people stuck, and how can they get unstuck?
I think the first thing is just lack of confidence in themselves, a sense that they can't pull it off, or a sense that, they look at somebody who's done something and they think, well, yeah, it makes sense that guy did it because he's fill in the blank, right? He's got more money, he's better looking, she's from a right family, she went to the right college, she's got more personality than me, she's, whatever. It's always sort of looking at other people and then downplaying yourself and downplaying your own ability. And the thing is I don't believe in the myth of superhuman. I do not believe that there are people who are better than other people. I think there's people that are smarter than other people. I think there's people that are wealthier than other people, obviously. There's people that are taller than other people. So there are the differences, but every single person is the same in that we all face adversity. We all face trials. You can't look at somebody who's been really successful and go, oh, well, yeah, it was easy for him. It's rarely easy for anyone. And so instead of building everybody else up to be this sort of mythical superhuman, and that's why they were able to accomplish it, instead of looking at them that way, saying, hey, that person's just like me. They put their shoes on, one shoe at a time. They put their pants on one leg at a time. They've got their troubles. They've had to overcome their challenges, and I can too. And I believe that anybody can do anything they want to do in life if they just put enough, strategic effort and action into it. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing, is thinking that for some reason they couldn't do it, even though other people have.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Yeah, I agree with you on the lack of confidence. I know myself, that's been something that, if I think I don't have the confidence, or who am I to talk to you, or, something like this, then that's just stuff playing in my head that's not
Yeah.
helping me. But if I'm kind of like, look, I've done good things and I can do this and it's possible. And, I don't know if it was you or not, but someone said it's like a numbers game, like if you just ask enough
Oh,
people,
sure.
you're going to get some yeses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. You just have to find, enough people to ask, right? And a certain percentage of them, it's crazy. You could probably choose, you could say, how many people want to lay on a bed of nails for a day? It might take you a million people, but you'll eventually find somebody who goes, yeah, sure, I'll sit on a bed of nails for a day. I don't know why anybody would, but you're always going to find somebody who's willing to do something.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. All right. The next question here. A core philosophy you embrace is serving others. One of the things I've heard you talk about is vision boards, where you have your vision board and then you put 5 or 10 other vision boards around of people that you want to put energy and intention to. What is another way that maybe we haven't thought of that people could serve others?
Yeah, and I'll reiterate that what you just mentioned, because it's a concept that I started doing a couple of years ago. Started talking about, particularly talking in the direct marketing, multi-level marketing, network marketing space, where that's really big. It's one of the biggest things you'll hear in that space is, create a vision board for yourself. So I started saying, yeah, create your own vision board, but also create other people's vision boards, or actually ask them to do it. So whatever your 5 closest team members are, or the people with the most potential, ask them to do a vision board for you that you can keep in your office and put it up underneath your vision board. And here's why. I mentioned I had a TV show with Zig Ziglar, and one of Zig's most famous quotes is, you can have anything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want out of life. And if you are going to help 5 people get their dream house and their dream vacation and their, whatever it is that they want, if they get that and you earn overrides on their business or whatever, you're going to get what you want out of life. But the reality is that that's true for an author. If I can help enough other people get out of my book something valuable, they're going to tell other people. And then it makes more money for me. I have a bigger reach, all those kinds of things. So this concept of serving other people and making sure that other people are taken care of is really, it's actually a selfish thing. I mean, if you think about it, you're so selfless. Well, okay, if you're selfless, it's actually the most selfish thing you can do is to be selfless. Because if you're selfless, it actually builds your business and builds your brand and builds your business, and so it's kind of a funny little twist on words I like to use there, that being selfless is the most selfish thing you can do, because, and probably not really selfish, but it's the most self-fulfilling for you, and it helps you. You earn more money, have better friendships, have better relationships, achieve more in your industry by helping other people. And so I always just suggest that with the vision boards. But I think the other thing is just asking people, how can I help you? You know, sometimes people will say, how did you get to work with John Maxwell, Jim Rohn, and Zig Ziglar? And I'll tell you, now being at a level not nearly as high as those guys, but I'm at a pretty lofty level in our industry, certainly not a legend like those guys, but people will say, you know, how did you get to work with those guys? And I know now, being at this level that I'm at, is people will call and say, will you help me? Will you help me? I want to do this. Will you help me? Well, that's the wrong question to ask somebody. The real question you should ask is, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. And so if I would have went to John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn and said, hey, I want to be a speaker like you, how can you help me? They would have said, I don't have enough time to help you. I'm busy in my own thing. But I asked a different question. I said, how can I help you? Well, what they needed most was content creation. So for John Maxwell, it was writing his nationally syndicated column and expressing his voice and his core values. When Jim Rohn heard about that, they called and said, hey, can you write the Jim Rohn 1-year program with us? And I said, sure, that's how I can help. So I'm helping John get what he wants, which is this, nationally syndicated column. I'm helping Jim by helping him with the Jim Rohn 1-year program. And then I had a television show, and the same network asked Zig Ziglar to do it. Well, he was about 80 years old. And so Zig really didn't want to carry the whole show by himself. So I was brought on to be basically the guest host. And my job was clearing the way for Zig to be Zig, right? And so I was second fiddle on that show. But you know what second fiddle did for me? Second fiddle raised my brand level so high. And so being second fiddle to Zig is like being first fiddle in any other orchestra. And so it's really an idea and an attitude of, how can I serve somebody else? And in doing so, it actually helps me. I have a friend who's in the radio business, and he is, in fact, he's my former radio co-host, and he is regularly, prior to Rush Limbaugh passing away, he was one of about 5 guest hosts. And now that Rush Limbaugh passed away, they've kind of gone into a sort of a legacy tour kind of thing. They're playing a lot of old clips of Rush and stuff. And this friend of mine is still guest hosting even after he's passed away. And it's a great way for him to build his brand, because it's still the most listened to radio show in America. And he hosts once or twice a week now. They have other hosts as well, but serving that family, is a way that's building his brand. So any way that you can help people, I think, is always a way to help yourself.
And I love that answer. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to think of you as the Scottie Pippen to the Michael Jordan.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, yeah. I mean, look at Pippen. Pippen's a great example, right? Here's Pippen, and Pippen he'd have been a star on any other team, right? Yeah. But he was always in Michael Jordan's shadow. But what did that earn him? It earned him a lot more money in salaries, because you can always command more money when you've won championships. It got him, I think, 6 rings. Yeah, and that whole team, B.J. Armstrong and the center, I can picture him. I can't remember what Cartwright and all those guys that never would have had the glory that they had, but they got glory because they were serving a guy who, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, although we all know it's really Wilt Chamberlain. But it's one of my favorite arguments to have with people, is the greatest basketball player of all time. So,
all right, thank you. Okay,
us old guys know that it's Wilt Chamberlain.
Well, I'm only 2 years younger than you, so.
Oh, okay.
I mean, and I know you worked for the Sonics, and I worked for the Blazers, so it was.
You did. You worked for the Blazers. I didn't know that.
In promotions and that kind of stuff when I was in college. So.
Oh yeah.
I was just slightly above a ball boy.
Yeah. No, but there's another thing. Being a ball boy, I mean, that's the worst of all serving jobs. You're picking up sweaty uniforms after the game, and and all that kind of stuff. But man, it took me all over, and I got to meet amazing people, and I got to sit on the court and watch some of the greatest players in NBA history, Dr. J, and guys like that, Artis Gilmore and George Gervin and all that, and of course the Trailblazers, although we always called them the Jailblazers because for a while there in the 90s there were a lot of them going to jail. And being Sonics fans, we called them the Jailblazers.
Yeah, that was a painful memory for me, so
yeah,
let's move on.
Right.
All right. What's one of the things people seem to misunderstand about having a breakthrough?
One of the misunderstandings?
Yeah, like someone wants a breakthrough, but they just maybe they have the wrong perception or the wrong idea about it, or
the first thing that pops into my mind is that we assume that it's going to come quickly and all at once. And I would suggest that it rarely comes quickly and all at once. There's a reason that Aesop's fable, I don't know, it's funny how often I mention Aesop's fables and people don't know what they are, but Aesop's fables was a book of fables written for children. And my mom, it's probably the book I read most growing up was Aesop's fables. And of course, there's a fable about the tortoise and the hare. And there's a reason that became very, very famous, is because it's true that most of the time the hare is going to lose the race to the tortoise, because the hare is all about flash and cash and running a quick dash, and the tortoise just keeps plugging away and eventually gets there. And to me, breakthrough can happen quickly and all at once, but it rarely does. If you're trying to lose weight, you don't lose 50 pounds in a day. You lose it over the course of 6 months or a year or whatever you and your doctor figure out. Saving $1 million. Sure, some people hit the lottery and they go from having $32 in the bank to having $1,032 in the bank. But most people who have $1,032 in the bank, it took them 20 years to get there. And so I think that's the biggest thing. And what happens when you expect it to be fast and all at once is when it doesn't, you get frustrated. So simply your perspective on it creates frustration. If instead you say, I'm going to allot myself more time and to hit stages of this overall goal, then what you do is you keep your motivation up as you hit each of these goals. And so one of the things that I talk about in regard to goal setting is it has to be big enough to inspire you, but small enough to achieve. If you're 100 pounds overweight and you say, I'm going to lose 5 pounds in the next year, it's easy to achieve, but it's not big enough to get you to do anything. Right. Or if you're 100 pounds overweight, you say, I'm going to lose 100 pounds in the next 2 weeks. That's a big goal, but it's not achievable. And so you have to stretch your goals and make them big enough to inspire you, but small enough to achieve. And the small enough to achieve can be broken down into stages. So instead of saying I'm going to lose 100 pounds in a month, you say I'm going to lose my first 10 pounds this month. And then at the end of the month, you go, hey, I actually lost 12 pounds. That's great. I'm further along. Now you feel good. Right. And then you go, okay, now I'm going to add, my next goal is going to be down another 10 pounds or whatever. Same can be done, whether it's building a business, recruiting salespeople, making money. Doesn't matter what your goal is. Setting it as a big goal, but giving yourself enough time to be able to do it so it's actually achievable. That's really important to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, that's perfect. And that ties into your last one with the rabbit and the turtle, about trying to race through things here. And I've heard that people say that there really are no unrealistic goals. There's just unrealistic timeframes. So
yeah,
that fits right into what you're saying.
I always used to say, in fact, it's interesting. I got to figure out, I'll tell you a funny story. I always used to say, anybody can do anything they want in life. And then I would always do a caveat and I'd say, look, there's certain things that are impossible. Shaquille O'Neal is never going to be a winning jockey, right? And I said that for years. And I kid you not, Brian, I was on television one day and I saw an ad with Shaquille O'Neal, and they were talking about possibilities and possibilities, and it showed him racing on a racehorse. And I thought to myself, somebody somewhere in that marketing department has been to one of my seminars. And it's like the craziest thing. So yeah, there's certain things that, you're never going to be able to do. But for the most part, almost anything that's available to anybody else is available to you as well.
All right, I love that. I'm gonna have to see Shaquille O'Neal on.
Yeah, I know. I got to go find the ad now. I can't remember what the ad was, but I just remember going, this guy somebody heard my seminars.
Yeah, he's taking my material.
Yeah, he's taking my material.
All right, the next one here is you talk a lot about the power of optimism and how important it is to be an optimist, because optimists see a better future, one worth going to. How can we become more optimistic, but not have it be Pollyanna, but have it be real and authentic? What are some ways we can?
Well, optimism is a choice. It really is a choice. What we think about something is our perspective, and you can have a positive perspective or a negative perspective. Let's say that your wife says to you, "Hey, let's go to that restaurant," and you're like, "Okay, it's downtown and it's kind of on the edge of a bad neighborhood, but it's an amazing restaurant. Yeah, if we go down there, we'll probably get mugged." Is your wife going to want to go there anymore if you're projecting a negative outcome? Oh, it's going to cost us way too much money, and parking is horrible, and we'll probably get mugged, and okay, so that's a real negative, pessimistic view of the night out. Or if you say, you know what, that's a great idea. I love that restaurant. It's got the best food. And yeah, it's expensive, but it's really worth it considering the ambiance and the food and the service. And that's a positive outlook. And we get to choose how we perceive everything. It's all in the perspective. One of the things that my wife and I will say when we're talking to each other or talking to somebody else, and somebody will say something negative, or they'll project something negative. We always say, well, that's one perspective. The other perspective is, and then you lay out the positive side of it. And so I think that it's really about a choice. I was just on another Zoom, and so I'm going to bring in an analogy that I use there. Always viewing what you do as a career in the most positive way. And I'll give you an example. Remember back in the olden days, Kodak was going through a branding thing, and some of the younger people are like, what's Kodak? Well, it used to be a film company. And somebody asked their marketing department, what is it that you sell? And they said, we sell film. And the branding expert said, you do not sell film. And they said, yeah, we do. That's what we do. We're a film company. He says, you're not a film company. You don't sell film, you sell memories. And it was transformational for them. Now, think about this. Let's say that you're a server in a restaurant and you're about to go pull a 10-hour shift. You could say to yourself, I got to go drag food around for people. That's what I do. I cart food around for people and I clean dirty dishes off the table. And, that's a real negative way of looking at your 10 hours you're about to spend. But as I always tell people who are servers, I tell them, you're not in the delivering food business. You're in the allowing people to do great things while they eat business. So maybe you show up and there's a couple and you think to yourself, oh, I got to drag these people their food all night. Or you could say, I'm allowing this couple to reestablish their marriage because they have a date night without their children. And I'm a significant part of that. I get to help their night go well. I'm helping a family get stronger. You're not carting food around. You're helping a family get stronger. Maybe it's for business people. You're not carting food around. You're helping business people create a product or a service that's going to help a lot of other people by being able to get together over a meal and share that meal and share their dreams and visions for the business they're creating. And so that's all just a perception of what you're doing. And I think it's important for us to always ask, what is my perception of what it is I'm doing or the people I'm involved with or, everything? How can I shift from viewing things negatively to viewing things positively? And because you could give me anything and I can tell you the negatives, but I can also tell you the positives. And it's the people who are in the positive side that achieve things. Because think about they did a thing once where they were talking about presidential candidates and the optimism of stump speeches, and there were some linguistics professors, and they found that the most positive person wins every single time. There's only been 2 elections now in the history that they went back and studied out of like 20 something elections where the most negative person won the election. Well, it makes sense, right? Imagine if somebody says, elect me and taxes are going to go through the roof, housing prices are going to go through the roof, food prices are going to go through the roof. You'll probably lose your home, you'll probably lose your business, but vote for me, for president. Nobody wants to vote for somebody who has such a negative outlook. We want to follow people who have a positive outlook. And so optimism is really attractive to people because people want to go to somewhere better. And so whatever you can do, whether it's for your family or your business or whatever, how can you view the future in a more positive way and then communicate that and inspire people to help you get there?
Oh, man, I love that. I love that perspective, and that, like you said, that there's 2 sides to every coin, but which side are you looking at, the positive or negative? So
yeah, there's something negative in everything, right?
Yeah.
If Jeff Bezos, the richest guy in the world, called you up and said, "Do you want to go into business with me?" You could say, "Well, I've heard some things. He's not necessarily the nicest guy, and he's blah blah blah, this, that, and the other thing." Or you could say, "The richest guy in the world just asked me to go into business with him." Like, take your pick. Doesn't mean that you're Pollyannish on the other side as well. It doesn't mean that you downplay every negative that there might be. You need to have a sense of realism and a realistic assessment of what's going on. But at the same time, you also need to realize that almost everything has 2 sides to it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
All right, the next one here, you've talked about successful and unsuccessful people, and it's not the absence of obstacles, but it's the presence of perseverance. And you've kind of already mentioned this too before, but just like doing things one more time, sticking with it a little bit more. How can we develop that kind of mindset or that attitude of
yeah. And I'm not the kind of guy that says there's never a time to quit. I think there is sometimes a time to quit. I think there are times that you just say, this is not going where I want it to go. I thought it would. For some reason, it's not. It might have been a lack of planning, or it might have been, change in the economy, or, something like that. I knew a guy once who had 500 employees, and they were going to go public on a Monday. And this was, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. But remember Black Friday in the stock market? They were set to go public. They were set to go public the day, Monday after that. Well, they had 500 employees. They were all going to get rich. Everything was going to go. And then, of course, the meltdown, their IPO didn't go. And 2 months later, they were bankrupt. And all the employees were gone and everything. And that's really unfortunate, but that's really the exception and not the rule, right? There are times when things just go bad. And there are times when people need to say, okay, I need to quit. But most of the time is not like that. Most of the time, the people who end up successful are just the people who outlasted the others, because everybody else quit when the going got tough. And, the old Robert Schuller book, I don't know if you remember the old Robert Schuller book, the tough, what is it? Tough times never last, but tough people do, and when the times get tough, tough people get going, or when the going gets tough, tough people get going. And that's really true. And so I think that a lot of times, and there have been times in my career where I was really struggling. And early on in my career, mid 90s, I remember thinking, just give it one more week. I literally said, just give it one more week. Just give it one more week. For a year or two, I think I was saying to myself, just give it one more week. And I did. And it was that ability to press through and to persevere that made me successful. I'll give you an analogy of somebody who's a weightlifter, maybe a bodybuilder, right? Those guys don't like getting up and going to the gym at 4 a.m. Those guys don't like passing on the pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving. They don't like doing that, but they have to persevere. One more morning. I can get up one more morning at 4 a.m. I can get up one more morning. And then there's the other guy who's also thinking about becoming a fitness competitor. And he wakes up and goes, yeah, I'm not going to do it this morning. I'm going to sleep in this morning. Well, then he ends up sleeping in the next morning and sleeping in the next morning and sleeping in the next morning. And he ends up in the stands watching the other people compete because he didn't discipline himself to get to the point where he could press through the challenges. So pressing through the challenges is so key because everybody faces challenges. Everybody faces challenges. I just read a book last year. It was one of my favorite books I read last year. It was called How to Be Rich by J. Paul Getty. And I didn't know that Getty had written about 6 or 7 of his own books, and he was the richest man in the world in the 70s. And it was just fascinating to read the stories that he told about how he got into the oil business and the real challenges that he faced. But his optimism made him go after those, and he succeeded. At one point, I think there were 11 oil companies in America, and he was the smallest, and he decided to start buying ones bigger than him. And he said, normally it's the bigger ones that buy the little ones. I just decided I was going to start buying the bigger ones because they had the assets that I wanted for distribution and things like that. So, but just all the challenges that even the wealthiest people face. It's life is hard. You know, one of my favorite sayings, Jesus said, in this world, you'll have trouble. Yep. In this world, who will have trouble? Well, if you've got a heartbeat and you're walking around, you will have trouble because life is hard and business is hard and relationships are hard, but they can also be the greatest things if we persevere, discipline ourselves, and focus in on succeeding.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like you can have momentum work either for you or against you in those things, where if you're in the arena or you're in the stands, you know, it's just those choices you made, like, am I going to get up and weight lift or not, or whatever. I'm going to skip to a question here that fits right into what you're saying here, because I got a quote from none other than J. Paul Getty.
Oh.
And here's the quote. It's, there is, however, hope for any person who wants to remain an individual. He can assert himself and refuse to conform. He'll be on his own, that's true. But while he will not have the security enjoyed by those who do conform, there will be no limits to what he may achieve. So my question to you is, how do we stay true to our unique self, not conform and try to fit in, so that our best self, our authentic self, can come out?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me was also one of the most profound things that ever happened to me. I was about 23 years old, maybe 24, but I think 22, 23. I was right out of college, and I went to a conference. Now, this story is really weird, Brian, but it had a profound impact on me the rest of my life. I was standing in the lobby of this big conference. I don't know, 500 people in this conference, and it was during one of the breaks. And I'm standing in the lobby, and there's everybody milling around. And I turn like this, and there's 2 women there. One was about 55, and the other was about 30. And the 30-year-old and the woman next to her, the 55-year-old, they looked at me, and the younger woman went like this. Her eyeballs went like this. And I was like, okay, this is weird. And then it ends up, this was her mother that was with her. I found out later, I'll tell you the story, but the mother says, looks at her, looks at me and says, is that him? And the daughter goes, uh-huh. And I'm going, okay, this is just really weird. So I look at the mom and she goes, oh, this is my daughter. We're here for this conference. We were in the hotel room last night sleeping. And about 2 a.m, she got shaken out of bed with this dream. And she woke me up and she said, I just had the weirdest dream. I saw this guy in my dream and I'm supposed to tell him something when I meet him. And the mom's like, okay. So that's why the mom said, is this him? Meaning, is this the guy from your dream? And she went like this. And they were as shocked as I am or was. And so the mom tells me this story. And then she looks at her daughter and says, well, tell him. And the daughter looks at me and she kind of shakes her head a little bit like coming out of a, trance or something. And she looks at me and she goes, I'm supposed to tell you to be a voice, not an echo. And I went, okay, that's good advice. Now that was probably 1989, so 32 years ago. I had a chance encounter with a mom and a daughter. I didn't get their names. I didn't talk to them anymore. I went, okay, duly noted. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. And we all went our separate ways. I didn't get their names. I didn't follow up with them, nothing. But I have remembered that piece of advice for 32 years. And be a voice, not an echo, is the answer to the question you asked. How do you keep it about yourself and your own identity and those kinds of things? Don't just be an echo. Sure, there's times you echo things, great things. We echo them, right? You just echoed a J. Paul Getty quote, right? And we're echoing that thing, right? But we also have to be a voice. We have to do our own work. We have to do our own internal emotional work, our own mental work. We have to do our own physical work. You've got to do your own work so that you are improving. And as you improve, you're going to help other people. If you're just echoing other people's stuff, first of all, eventually other people will figure it out. There's a guy right now pretty big in the personal development world, and he got called out online about a year and a half ago, and this person put together like a 20-minute video showing how he's just stolen everybody else's stuff. And you watch this video and you go, oh wow, this guy, but he's really, really big, but he has none of his own stuff. He literally will just take somebody else's quote it, not tell anybody that it was somebody else's, and then passes himself off. Well, eventually his career is going to come to an end because people are going to realize, oh, this guy, he's an echo. He's not a voice. And all he's doing is telling us what other people are, and he doesn't even have the integrity to tell us that it's somebody else. So you've got to do your own work, build your own brand, provide your own value to other people. And, as you go through life and you're experiencing things and you're coming to your own conclusions, those are the things that you need to pile up and pull out of your reservoir when you're helping other people.
I'm going to go back in time here on a commercial. Is it Mimrex or is it a copy?
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Is it live or is it Memorex?
Yeah. And so, there again, the point is be yourself, be an original. Don't just try to copy everybody else. Take things that are good advice and good wisdom. Use
well, and I think it was Ella Fitzgerald that was in that live Memorex commercial. I think it was Ella Fitzgerald. Remember, she sang really high and then it broke the glass. I think it was Ella Fitzgerald. I could be wrong, but let me ask you a question. Would you rather go to an Ella Fitzgerald concert or listen to an Ella Fitzgerald cassette? You'd rather go to you'd rather go see the person. And I think that's really true is we want the source to be the core source, not just something else that somebody else is passing along.
You've talked about how you've worked with John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, the icons in the personal development industry. What's one or two takeaways from your experience working with them and having them mentor you and being a colleague that you think, wow, that was really, really good stuff?
Yeah. This is probably the number one question I get asked on interviews is, what was it like? What did you learn working with Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar? And I always have the same answer. And the answer is be yourself. Now you might go, how did you learn be yourself from Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn? Well, I'll tell you how. Those two guys were two of the biggest legends in the speaking industry. I mean, you really don't get any higher in terms of legendary status than Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar. And yet those two could not be more different. They were both legends in the industry, but they could not be more different. Zig Ziglar, Zig was a gregarious, outgoing, he would come down early and he'd stay late. He'd talk to everybody. And Jim was more of an introvert, and he would come down 5 minutes before he spoke, and he might stay for a little bit, but then he went back up to his hotel room and stayed there. And Zig Ziglar was all over the stage, and he was prancing around the stage, and he'd come forward and then he'd get down on his knee and he'd be talking really fast and pumping that machine, the water pump as part of his, analogy. And then he'd get right up and he'd whisper like this. He was all over. And we used to joke about Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn he stood behind the podium or stood behind the lectern, and his voice didn't go up and down like this. And we always joked that, Jim's power move was when he did this. When he took off his reading glasses. It was like, Jim's getting serious. he just took his readers off. Holy cow. So very different stylistically than Zig. And so I remember thinking, I don't need to be Zig, and I don't need to be Jim. I need to be Chris, and I need to be the best Chris. And early on in my career, I think I was trying to be somebody else. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got from anybody was a friend of mine from high school, a guy named Roy. And Roy came and heard me talk one time, probably mid 90s. And he said, he got, when we were done, he came up and he was talking to me. He said, Chris, obviously you're one of the best I've ever seen. You're great. You're amazing, blah, blah, blah. And he said, but do you know what would make you world class? And at the time he was probably about as old as I was, late 20s. And he said, you know what would make you world class? And I said, what? He said, if you were as funny on stage as you are off stage. And I remember thinking, because I can be really goofy. I'm the kind of guy that's always goofing around and trying to make people laugh. And, I was always the class clown, and which got me into a lot of trouble. But I love to have fun and laugh and poke fun and everything. But I reflected on it. I was like, I think I was trying to be the professional speaker. I think this is so important, that I was losing my own identity. I was pretending to be a motivational speaker instead of just being Chris Widener, motivational speaker. And so I started allowing myself to do some goofy things, and so in my speeches, I do a lot of acting out, I'll act out the parts, right? So, even I've got a whole story about my 14-year-old daughter, and I'll act her out working at the barista shop as she, learned, one of the parts of my thing, but I'll act it out a lot. And it's funny, and it's over the top, and it makes people laugh. And one of the things that I learned is being funny is the best thing to do right before you give somebody a really deep point. And for those of you who are interested in communication or speaking or any of these kinds of things, being funny is the thing you should do right before you make a really deep point. And I'll tell you why. We all know there's a mind-body connection. Our bodies, our minds, our emotions are all wrapped up one with another, right? And so when somebody laughs, it opens them up both literally and figuratively. So think about when somebody's laughing hysterically, do they do this? No, they don't do that. They don't do this. They do this. They literally open themselves up, But at the same time that they are physically, literally opening themselves up, emotionally and spiritually, they're opening themselves up. And it's a great time. And if you watch some of my speeches, you can do it at chriswidener.com. There's a speech I gave. You'll notice that I'll make people do this, and then I insert a very specific point. I mentioned the one about my daughter. It's a really funny story and a lot of laugh points. But at the very tail end of that, after I've got them laughing and literally opening up, that's when I insert a really important, deep, meaningful point. And people get it because they're receptive to it. And so, that was a great lesson for me to learn to be myself. And in being myself, it actually improved not only the style of my speaking, but it improved the effectiveness, the efficacy of my speaking, because it allowed me to get those deeper points through by opening people up with laughter first.
Yeah, I've got to say, I've watched that speech of you talking about your daughter, and I will say I was laughing, I was going along with it. And then you're right, you hit the point of we need to listen to other people. We need to see the world from their point of view, get their understanding. And then that just opens up everything. And how she got way more tips and everything. Yeah. And, but prior to that, you're telling jokes, about, hey, is this, how did you make all this money, daughter?
Right. You're just selling coffee up there, right? That's the first punchline. She goes from making $25 a day in tips to $75 a day in tips. So I call her into my office and I look at her and I say, "You're how do I put this? You're just selling coffee up there, right?" And everybody laughs. And then I tell the story about what she learned about people. And then I get them laughing again. And I say, in a way, it's kind of sick, because here's a 14-year-old girl who's learned how to manipulate 45-year-old men. And of course, everybody laughs. And then I go, but there's a deep spiritual truth there. And that deep spiritual truth is that everybody wants to be known, even at a subconscious level. Here's a 45-year-old man who's being asked questions by the barista about what he does for a living, and what his commitment to life is, and his, purpose and all those things. And they're even tipping more at a subconscious level because everybody wants to be known. So you get them laughing, and then you draw them down to this idea of everybody wants to be known. So if that's true, how can you work with your teams or your employees or whatever, because they all want to be known? How can you open that up so that you can really know people and lead people and serve people? And that's just a good analogy of that's how I do it. And I don't know that I would have ever figured it out if I didn't just have a friend who just explicitly said, "You're really funny when we're hanging out. You're not so funny on stage. If you could be funny on stage like you're funny off stage, that would really help you." And I just took that advice at face value and changed it. I don't know that I've ever even told Roy. He probably doesn't even remember telling me, but we're still Facebook friends. And I should probably tell him someday, because I tell this story a lot about my friend Roy confronting me and telling me to be funnier.
Yeah, maybe you should take him out to dinner.
I should. Next time I'm up in Seattle, I should take Roy out for dinner and say, you made me a lot of money.
All right, we've talked about a lot of different things, but what's something I haven't brought up that you think is important for people to know if they're trying to have a breakthrough or get past limitations and reach a goal?
I think focusing on excellence is one of the number one things to do. Top 4 or 5 things, but focusing on excellence, because excellence attracts. Excellence attracts. People want to be around people who excel at things, and people will seek out people who excel at things. I mean, think about yourself. You probably, and I don't mean you, Brian, just you, but I mean you, everybody listening to us, you probably already seek out people based on their level of excellence. I'll give you a few examples. If you're 100 pounds overweight, are you going to go to another guy who's 100 pounds overweight and say, "Hey, tell me about your diet? How does that work?" No, you're going to go to somebody who's physically fit, and you're going to say, "Tell me about your workouts, and tell me about your diet, and tell me about keto versus the zone versus Atkins versus just basic calorie deficit versus the new fasting things. Talk to me about that." Why? Because they excel at it. So that's who you go to. If you're looking to make money, are you going to pull off the off ramp off the freeway and come to the stop sign and roll down your window to a guy holding a sign that says "We'll work for food" and say, "Hey, you got any stock tips?" No, because the guy doesn't know anything about stocks, and if he does, he doesn't know how to do it, right? No, you're going to go to your rich uncle who owns 150 apartment buildings, and or a friend of yours who's in a stockbroker, or you're going to go to somebody who's rich to find out how to be rich, right? If you're having marriage problems, are you going to go to the couple that's been married 3 years and fights all the time in public? No, you're going to go to a couple that's been married for 40 years, who's obviously had ups and downs like all marriages do. You're going to say, "Tell us your secret. How did you do it? How did you get here?" So if it's true that we seek out people who excel, then wouldn't it also be true that if we excelled, other people would seek us out? Excellence is attractive. People see excellence and they want to be around it. They want to participate in it. They want to be involved in it. They want to work for people who excel. They want to work with people who excel. If you're single and you're on the dating scene, you're going to get with somebody who's, doesn't take care of themselves and shows up at your first date all sloppy and their hair out of line and they haven't brushed their teeth in 3 weeks. No, you're going to want to be with somebody who takes care of themselves, and so I think it's a really interesting principle that we operate out of ourselves, but we don't understand that other people also operate out of it. And they look at us and they're asking at a conscious and a subconscious level, does this person excel at what they do?
Yeah, and I think that's really powerful because if you, one of the things you've talked about in one of your other speeches was, why do people buy Hanes underwear? And it's because it's associated with greatness and excellence in terms
Michael
of
Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, that's a good point. I always tell this story about Michael Jordan, right? Everybody knows that he sells Nike Air Jordans. Like if you say, "What kind of shoes does Michael Jordan wear?" They'd say Air Jordans. If I said, "What kind of what does Michael Jordan drink during a timeout in a basketball game?" Everybody's going to know it's Gatorade, because they've associated it with Michael Jordan. And then I always ask this thing, okay, ladies, I always say in my events, okay, ladies, what else does Michael Jordan sell? And the ladies always yell, Hanes underpants, you know? And so it's funny because one time, probably 15 years ago or so, I was at a meeting. It was a big women's network marketing company. And there was a woman, she was about 75 years old. She was sitting in the front row. And I said, now, why would they pay Michael Jordan millions of dollars to tell you that he wears Hanes underpants? And this woman, she tilted her head down, and I was in the front, and she was in the front row, so I could hear her. She tilted her head down, and she went, because he looks good in them. And I looked at this lady and I said, ma'am, I am not going to tell this audience what you just said, but I am going to tell every audience after this what you just said, because it's funny. It's not true, but it's funny. And I mean, it's true that he looks good in a pair of underpants because he's, you know, a professional athlete, physically fit, you know, whatever. But that's not why they pay him millions of dollars. Because you could go to any college campus in America and find 1,000 20-year-old kids that have a six-pack, right? And they're not going to pay them millions of dollars to say that they wear Hanes underpants. Why do they pay Michael Jordan? Not because he looks good in them, because he's the greatest basketball player of all time. That's why they pay him the money. And so I think it's a good analogy for us, is that when you can equate a product with excellence, which is what the entire celebrity endorsement is based on. Let's take Wheaties and put a world champion on the Wheaties box, and people will think Wheaties are amazing. You know, breakfast of champions. Wheaties isn't the breakfast of champions. Come on. Do you think somebody's at the Olympic Village for the Summer Olympics and he's going to run the 1500 that day? Do you think he gets up and walks out and somebody says, hey, where are you going? Oh, I'm going to the cafeteria. Oh, what are you going to eat? I'm going to eat 4 bowls of Wheaties. No, that is not the breakfast of champions. The breakfast of champions is egg whites, fruit, and some proteins. That's probably the breakfast of champions that the guy running the 1500 is going to be eating that morning. Although he might eat a little bit of carbs or whatever for carbo loading or whatever. I think that's more long distance kind of stuff. But no, people are attracted to excellence. And so to whatever degree we can excel in our own lives, it's going to change other people's perceptions of us. The way we speak, the way we dress, the way we treat people, it's all important. Our character, excelling in our character, excelling in our skills. There are things that we can do. And the great news is it doesn't matter where you're at. It's okay. If you do not operate out of excellence in a certain area of your life right now, that's okay. What isn't okay is if that's still true a year from now. If that's still true a year from now, that's not okay. It's okay right now. You might be looking at yourself going, oh, you know, I haven't really taken care of myself and I haven't really worked as hard as I could. And okay, that's okay. I don't care if you're 22, 42, or 62. It doesn't matter. That's okay. But what's not okay is if it's still true a year from now. Because right now you have the opportunity to say, I can lose weight. I can save more money. I can treat people better. I can have a better marriage. You know, my wife and I, we're both remarried, second marriage. We actually wrote a book called Better the Second Time. And we wrote a book we wrote it before we got married. And people were like, you think you're experts in marriage? And we're like, no, we're not experts in marriage. But what we're experts in is realizing what we didn't do right the first time. And we came into our marriage really saying, what do we want to do right the second time? How do we want to excel the second time so that we don't, so that we don't have a broken relationship? And one of the things that Denise and I focus on is constant improvement in every area. And, you know, most couples don't ever sit down and say, how can we excel in our relationship? You know, how can we make every area of our relationship better? And you can improve it. Couples need to talk about money, and they need to talk about child rearing, and they need to talk about power and who controls what in the relationship and who has responsibility for what. They need to talk about sex. They need to talk about, all those kinds of things. But most couples just kind of get in that state where they're like, let's just live it. Let's not just talk about it, And it always reminds me of that joke of the little old man and the little old woman driving down the road. They've been married 60 years. And the woman says to the man, she says, how come the only time you ever told me you loved me was when we got married? And he said, well, if anything ever changes, I'll let you know. And that's not what a woman wants to hear. If anything changes, I'll let you know. She wants to hear every day that you love her and you cherish her, and, and those kinds of things. So whether it's your marriage or your business or your own physical fitness or your communication skills, whatever it might be, you can go and improve it. And it just takes a commitment to improving it. And once you do that, you're going to see your level of influence increase.
I had no idea you were going to talk about marriage here, because I was married for over 20 years, got divorced, and now I'm engaged to be married again, so a second marriage here. So I think I need to get that book immediately.
Yeah, it's a great little book, and it's what we wanted our second marriage to be. And it's a lot about communication. It's a lot about talking about things, because most couples do not talk about things. They're not able, and the harder the topic, the less likely they are to talk about it. I mean, it's one thing to go, hey, where should we go on vacation? Well, I want to go to Mazatlan. Well, I want to go to Cabo. Okay, well, let's go to Cabo this time. That's relatively easy. A little more difficult is how do we punish little Johnny for doing what he did at school? That's a little bit more difficult. Even more difficult is how do we spend the money? Who gets what to spend on what? And what's the budget for dresses and purses versus watches and whatever it is the guy wants to buy? Now, okay, well, wait a minute, you got more money than I did, and I want some. Now it gets a little harder. And then the hardest is sex. Talking about sex and how often should we have it, and whose libido, and how do we arrange it, and how do you make sure it happens even with the kids, and taking care of all the kids and things like that. And so because those conversations are tough, a lot of people just never have them, to the demise of their marriage. And so our book, I always say it's a second marriage book, but it's really a marriage book, because we've had couples we had one lady that we know has been married to the boy she met in the 8th grade, and it's the only person she's ever dated. And she said, this was an amazing book because it made me think and made us think about things we needed to talk about. But then really, I always say it's not just a second marriage book, it's really a marriage book, but it's not really even a marriage book, it's a communication book. It's really about communicating with your spouse about all of those kinds of things. And then, of course, in a second marriage, you have exes and stepchildren and things like that you need to talk about and need to figure out what you're going to do to make your second marriage great.
And what's the title of that book again?
It's called Better the Second Time.
Better the Second Time. Okay.
All right. And we've read some other books together. We read a book that we recommend all the time called Cherish. And, when you take your vows, the traditional vows are, I promise to love and to cherish. Well, everybody talks about love, but what does it mean to cherish? To hold in high regard, to esteem, to laud, and when we were reading that book, we read it the first time, we've read it 2 or 3 times together, and we read together a lot. And guys, if you're in a tough marriage and you want to just thrill your wife, ask her if you can read a book together, and then you read it. Women, and this is a broad sweeping generality, of course, but women love it when their husband will read to them and invest that time. What it really says to your wife is, I'm willing to invest the time to sit down, to read, to communicate, to talk. And most women will be thrilled by that. But as we read that book together, and we do that every morning, we read together and learn and grow and improve before we start our day. But Cherish was just a fantastic book. And when we were reading through it a couple times, I can remember Denise and I saying to each other, I didn't do that in my first marriage. If I would have done that, I wonder how life would have been different. Well, it's unfortunate that it happened in the past, but now you've got the information. And once you have the information, the only thing you're going to be held accountable is whether or not you actually use it. And so those are the kinds of things that we try to apply is, how do we cherish our spouse in private, and how do we cherish them in public? One of the great tips is never put your spouse down or disagree vehemently with your spouse in public. Do it privately. If you need to disagree, there are times that Denise will say something that, she's got the number wrong or something like that. I don't go, wait a minute. No, that's the wrong number, blah, blah, blah. It's not that big of a deal. The bigger deal is allowing her to communicate. And I do the same thing, right? I'll get a little number wrong or something like that. And there's not jumping in and constantly correcting and those kinds of things. And I think that what that does is it shows that you cherish your spouse and you honor your spouse and those kinds of things. And so it's just one more area that we can excel in. And if you excel in marriage, that's one of the best things to excel in, because that's going to be a big part of your happiness, a big part of it's the biggest part of your life. So working to excel in your marriage is a big thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I just love all that stuff that you just shared there. And it doesn't matter if it's a first marriage, just probably just even in a good relationship, this book would be awesome if you want to.
If you're on your fifth marriage, you probably needed to read a different book. I probably can't help you if you're on your fifth marriage. There are probably deeper things at work there.
Okay. Might need a different program.
Yeah, Elizabeth Taylor wrote the book Better the Seventh Time, I think.
All right. Well, we got the last question here. If you could have a billboard with anything on it and people would see this, what would be on the billboard and why?
Well, it's funny you brought up a billboard, because I've been talking about this billboard a lot lately. We have a daughter that goes to University of Alabama, and all the people who live in Alabama are going to immediately know what I'm talking about. But there's a guy who advertises on the road from Tuscaloosa to Birmingham, and he's an attorney. I think he's an ambulance chaser. And it says, "Call me, Alabama." And what he means is call me, Alabama. If you've been in a wreck or whatever, call me. And every time I see it, I think, and this is the bad part about being a writer, I think he needs a comma there. He's missing a comma. Every time I see that billboard, I'm like, it says, "Call me, Alabama." It should say, "Call me, comma, Alabama." So what it sounds like is they're supposed to call him that's his name, Alabama. And it's supposed to be, "Hey, Alabama, call me." That's a real digression, but it's the funniest billboard thing I'm thinking of right now. As soon as you said, if you could do a billboard, I think of "Call me, Alabama." If I had a billboard, I would probably just say something along the lines of "Don't quit," or maybe something like "You are enough," or "You are valuable." I just think so much about life is about identity and who we think we are, who we believe that we are, who we believe that other people think we are. Too many people place too much emphasis on who other people think they are. And there's an old saying, "I play for an audience of one." I don't know if you've ever heard that or not, but there's only one person I need to be happy with me, and that's God. Because I'm going to spend 70, 80, maybe if I'm lucky, 90 or 100 years here, and then I disappear from the face of the earth. And it doesn't matter what you think of me, doesn't matter what, the guy on Facebook thinks of me, doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of me. Really, the only person I need to really make sure thinks I'm okay is God, And so that's my mentality is every day I have to ask myself, is what I'm doing pleasing to God? And that's really the only thing that matters to me. So just reminding people that they're valuable, that they were created with a purpose, that there's a design for their life. Those are the kinds of things that I want people to know, because at the core, it's who we think we are that determines what we think we can do. You think about somebody who grew up in a blue collar family, and their dad was blue collar, the grandpa was blue collar, the great grandpa was blue collar. They don't know anybody that makes $100,000 a year. And the kid says, "I think I might want to go to college." And the dad says, "Who do you think you are?" That's not who we are. We are blue collar people. Or, how could you vote for that person? We are Democrats, or we are Republicans, or we are, whatever. That whole concept of who we grow up believing we are is really important, because sometimes you're not that person. Sometimes that's who somebody else wants you to be, but your life may be much bigger than that, or your life may be much different than that. And I'll wrap it up with a story from my favorite book that I've written called The Angel Inside. The Angel Inside was #2 on the Wall Street Journal, #7 on the New York Times, #3 on Amazon. And I don't just mean #3 in a subcategory, I mean #3 overall. And the dirty little secret of Michelangelo, the book is about the life of Michelangelo and the success lessons from the life of Michelangelo. In early 1500s in Florence was Florence, Italy was the beginning of the citizen legislature movement, where citizens actually had a say. And this was where Machiavelli was, who wrote The Prince. He learned politics in that early Florence citizen legislature. And so being a politician, unlike today, being a politician was the highest thing you could do. And Michelangelo's father wanted him to be a politician, like many parents in that day wanted their children to grow up to be politicians. Because I mean, it'd be like, when we were growing up, it's be a doctor, be an attorney, be a judge, something like that, that had this sort of high honor to it. Well, that's the way it was in the early 1500s in Florence, Italy. You were supposed to grow up and be a politician. And unlike today, where people who are, famous artists like Monet and, Vivaldi and Beethoven and, artists like that, Leonardo da Vinci, they were not held in high regard. Particularly artists who were sculptors and painters. More so with musicians, were more honored, but sculptors and painters were kind of, it was a dirty art, and you had to clean your hands. It wasn't highfalutin enough. And Michelangelo left his home early on, if I remember right, 15 or 16, 14, maybe as early as 14, and went and lived with a patron of the arts. And imagine if Michelangelo would have followed his dad's dream for his life and would have become a politician. None of us would have ever heard of Michelangelo. He would have become a backbench politician. But in the ability to walk away from what his father had as his desire for his life, he left being a backbench politician and instead became arguably one of the greatest 2 or 3 artists of all time. We would have never had the David had we not had Michelangelo. We would have never had the Sistine Chapel had we not had Michelangelo, the artist. We would have never had what I consider to be his greatest work. And if you've ever been to the Vatican, you've seen it probably. It is called the Pieta, which is the Mother Mary as a young woman. She's not older in the statue. She's a young woman, and she's holding the full-grown Jesus laying dead across her lap. It's hauntingly beautiful. It's an amazing piece. It's also, by the way, a funny story. It's the only piece that Michelangelo ever signed. And the reason he signed it was he did the Pieta in Rome, and then he went back and did the David back in Florence. And when he was back in Florence, people were saying, have you seen this new statue at the Vatican by this other artist? And he went, that's not his, that's mine. I did that. So he went back down to Rome and he chiseled his name across the sash. Like, everybody's going to know this is Michelangelo, not some other guy, right? But, if Michelangelo would have followed somebody else's version of his life, we would have never had Michelangelo. And so I always encourage people, take good advice from people. And, I've tried to help my kids, go where they need to go, but not so much to fulfill what I want them to fulfill, but to help them, with what I know about them and, what I know their personalities to be and their interests and things like that. But blaze your own trail, do your own thing. You were created unique with a very special purpose in life. Don't do what somebody else wants you to do. Do what you know you were created and born to do.
I love that. And I love how you put blaze your own trail in there. There's subliminally a little blazers there.
Yeah. Little trailblazers. Yeah, that's right.
But no, seriously, I mean, that's a really serious message.
Yeah.
And I think it's so true. And it's something that most of us in society, I think it's a real struggle. It's a real struggle to be who you are and to really do that. So if we can do that, I think it impacts all areas of our life. So I really appreciate that advice and that tip.
Absolutely.
How can people get a hold of you or get in contact?
Sure. Yeah, I do executive coaching. I work with about 10 people at any given time, doing personal coaching, executives, entrepreneurs who want to grow their business. They can just send me an email. My email is really simple. It's chris@chriswidener.com. You can go there, or you can send me a message on Facebook. I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/Chris Widener Speaker. So Twitter, I'm on Twitter @Chris Widener, but you can find me pretty much anywhere. Just do a little Google search and reach out to me if you'd like to work with somebody, help you grow your life and business. We'd love to help you.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being here. I'm just very grateful for the time that you spent and all the information you shared. I thought it was wonderful, and I've literally taken pages of notes here while you're doing this. And
well, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you.